Fernand Braudel, who is a leftist, but not a Marxist, and who has done 1,000 times more work on historical detail, I say I would trust Fernand Braudel. If Fernand Braudel says this network of cities was the birth of capitalism, I trust him completely. And there's a very good reason for it. Foreign trade, international trade, generated profits that were 10 to 100 times as large as regular trade, precisely because they were connecting markets and producers and consumers that were not in touch with one another, and therefore they could invent their own prices. Throughout history, each one of these nodes became dominant at a time. Venice was dominant in the 14th century, was the dominant node. Then it loses the lead to Genoa in the 15th, because Genoa was like the Dubai of today. Just like Dubai is a center of financiers that basically is there to process petrodollars. There's such an enormous wealth associated with oil that you need a city that's specialized in processing wealth. Genoa in the 15th century was the processor of wealth for entire Europe. All the silver that came from mines in Guanajuato and in Lima, Peru, would arrive at Genoa before actually reaching Madrid, which is obviously its destination. It belonged to the kings of Spain. But because the ships would take 6 months to go to Mexico and 6 months to come back, roughly, what that meant is that the kings would have lots of money suddenly when the ship arrived filled with silver, and if they didn't know how to spend it wisely, then they would have to wait until the next shipment of silver arrived. The arrangement they had then, Madrid, which is located somewhere around there, let's make it into a triangle to show that it is a hierarchical, central place hierarchy. The financiers from Genoa would lend money constantly throughout the year to the kings of Spain, and the kings of Spain would simply pay them with the silver that arrived from the New World. So the shipments of silver from the New World, which of course arrived through the Atlantic, would not stop in Barcelona or other Spanish ports, would go directly to Genoa. So as Braudel says, who do you think profit the most from the silver stolen from the New World? The Spanish? No, the Genoese. Lisbon was another capital. Well, let me just continue, because actually Lisbon was never. Antwerp, which became an incredibly potent trading center, was now the capital by the 16th, not the capital, the dominant node by the 16th century. That means that the center of gravity of Europe had already started moving in the 16th century to the north. Yes?
There was no silver from the New World in the 15th century, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, because it's 1492. This is the 16th century. And this is the first half. You're absolutely right. Thank you for telling me that. And it's the second half. It was the end of the 15th century, but obviously you cannot get any silver if you discover America in 1492. Amsterdam becomes the capital in the 17th century. London, not the capital, the dominant node of the network. The 18th and 19th centuries. And eventually New York, I'm going to add it here even though it's not in the map, continues to be the capital of this network, which still exists in the 20th century. So, we're going to have to take a break soon, but let me just finish up what I just said. These cities then were oriented towards the outside. Unlike landlocked capitals which turn to look inwards and who try to distill their identity from local cultural producers to define a very well-defined regional identity in contrast with rival regions around them, These guys never cared about defining an identity. First of all, they couldn't have anyway. Their neighborhoods were inhabited by different ethnicities, precisely because they were long-distant merchant towns. Armenians, Jews, Muslims, Dutch in Venice, Venetians in Amsterdam would form neighborhoods of merchants within those cities. Venice, for instance, the word ghetto is actually of Venetian origin, Venetian Italian. It didn't mean what it means today, you know, but it meant a neighborhood that the government of Venice had decreed was for Armenian traders, or was for Jewish traders, or was for Muslim traders, or was for Dutch traders, right? They wanted to put them in one place. But despite the fact that they were segregated in different neighborhoods, and a similar story can be told of the other cities, they commingled. So if you were somebody who lived in Venice in the 14th century, or somebody who, like Spinoza, who lived in Amsterdam in the 17th, you would walk around the streets and you would see people with turbans, people with tunics. You would hear all kinds of different tongues and languages spoken. You would get used to a cosmopolitan view of the world. You were not provincial in the metaphorical sense of the word. You know, living your own regional culture and being proud of your own regional culture and being you know, dismissive of the regional cultures elsewhere, which you saw as inferior, even within your own country or within your own province.
Like Saspe?
Excuse me?
Like Saspe?
So here they were used to heterogeneity. So they never tried to distill a Venetian culture or a Genoese culture. Right? London, I have to say, is an example. It's an exception because London is a schizophrenic city. It's half maritime port, connected to the rest of the world financially to this day, and it is the capital of the country. But as you can see when you go to London, the two halves of the city are actually literally two different halves. It's Westminster City with the tradition and the Queen and the guards and the changing of the guards and all the trappings of the aristocracy and the court. And then there's the city of London proper, which is the financial center, which has absolutely nothing to do with those things, right? These are like can-do financiers thinking about numbers and thinking about large amounts of capital, investments and so on at an international level. They couldn't care less about the Queen and the changing of the guard and so on. So London is weird that way. But nevertheless, you can still see that that half of London belonged to this network, while the other half of London may have actually been more part of England proper with it, you know, English prime agriculture and so on. So culturally, they were very different. They were hybrids in all respects. Commercially, they were very different because they traded only luxury items, from spices to porcelains to silks to precious metals. And of course, transportation was 10 times as fast, because transportation by sea was so much faster, with the exception of the Pony Express that I just mentioned, which was only of use by very few people. Transportation by sea was 10 times as fast as by land, which means that Venice was closer to Genoa, or even closer to Lisbon in terms of traveling time, not in terms of distance, than it was from, say, Florence, the capital of Tuscany, or Rome, in its own backyard or in its own territory. Right? It would take you longer to get from Venice to those cities than it would take you to get from Venice to Lisbon. Now that meant that these cities were closer connected to one another than they were with cities of their own language.